Adrian Way had never forgotten where he came from. His mother ran a small corner store, the kind with flickering fluorescent lights and dusty shelves that held the same cans of beans for months. Their family barely scraped by. Every textbook, every exam, every late night at the library with his eyes burning from exhaustion had been a battle for a future that seemed perpetually just out of reach. So when the acceptance letter from Waseda University arrived, Adrian had cried. Not from joy, though that was there too, but from relief so overwhelming it had cracked something open in his chest. The scholarship arrived the same week. A full ride, tuition, housing, a modest stipend for living expenses, all courtesy of the Shin Group Education Fund. The irony was so cruel it could only be cosmic punishment. Because if there was one person Adrian despised more than anyone in the world, more than the kids who'd mocked his second-hand clothes, more than the teachers who doubted his potential, more than his own father who'd walked out when Adrian was 7, it was Ryland Shen. Their rivalry stretched back through childhood like a wound that never quite healed. Ryland Shen, the flawless alpha heir, stood at the top of every class, every competition, every award ceremony. He moved through the world like it owed him nothing because it already gave him everything. Perfect grades, perfect family, perfect pheromones that smelled of lychee and something darker, something that made omegas and betas alike turn their heads when he walked past. Adrian, sharp-tongued and relentless, had clawed his way up from nothing and ended up second place to Ryland Shen again and again and again. Adrian remembered their final high school debate. The gymnasium lights had been harsh overhead, washing out the colors of the banners hanging from the rafters. He prepared for weeks, researched until his eyes bled, memorized counterpoints to counterpoints. But Ryland had dismantled his arguments with that infuriating precision, calm, collected, devastatingly logical. He'd picked apart Adrian's evidence like a surgeon dissecting tissue, and then lingered afterward. His eyes had lingered too long on Adrian's flushed face. A hunger flickered beneath the surface of his taunt, barely disguised. No matter how high you climb, Adrian, don't forget your future still stands on money from my family. That wound had never healed. Not really. It had calcified into something hard and cold, buried deep in Adrian's chest where he didn't have to look at it. So when university came, Adrian avoided Ryland Shen like the plague. He worked part-time jobs, 3 of them in the first semester alone. He studied late in obscure library corners Ryland would never frequent. He kept his distance with the dedication of a man defusing bombs. The last thing he wanted was to owe Ryland Shen anything. Not acknowledgement, not attention, not even a glance. But fate, Adrian was learning, didn't give a single fuck about what he wanted. The night it all fell apart started like any other disappointment. An old classmate, Lewis, had returned from abroad and invited everyone to a reunion dinner. Adrian had gone only out of obligation because Lewis had once lent him notes when Adrian's mother was sick, and Adrian still remembered kindness even if the world didn't. He sat quietly at the far end of the long table, picking at his food, nodding along to conversations he wasn't really part of. The other guests laughed about old teachers and shared photos of their new lives. Adrian smiled when he was supposed to smile, and then the air shifted. He felt it before he saw it, a prickle at the back of his neck, a sudden heaviness in the room. His pulse stuttered. Ryland Shen walked in. The suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored. His dark hair was swept back from his forehead, and his jaw was sharper than Adrian remembered, or maybe Adrian just hadn't been this close to him in years. He moved with that quiet confidence, the kind that came from never having to prove anything to anyone. A faint trace of lychee drifted through the air. He hadn't changed at all. Immediately, the table's energy gravitated toward him. Toasts were raised. Laughter erupted at something he said. People leaned in, eager for his attention, as if he owned the room, which Adrian supposed he basically did. Adrian stayed at his corner, lips pressed thin, fingers tightening around his glass. It shouldn't matter anymore. They weren't in school. They weren't competing. He could ignore Ryland's shin for one dinner and then go back to his carefully constructed life of invisibility. He took a drink, then another. The alcohol burned going down, but that was fine. That was normal. He wasn't much of a drinker, couldn't afford the habit, but tonight felt like an exception. But then the heat started. Not the pleasant warmth of alcohol spreading through his chest. Something wrong. Something that crawled under his skin like fire ants, setting every nerve ending ablaze. Adrian's skin flushed. His pulse stuttered into something irregular and panicked. A sharp ache twisted in his gut, low, deep, insistent. He gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. What the hell? This wasn't drunkenness. He'd been drunk before, that one disastrous party freshman year. This was different. This was his body burning up from the inside out, sweat beading on his forehead, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Panic gripped him by the throat. He excused himself, mumbled something about not feeling well, and stumbled upstairs to the hotel attached to the restaurant. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else, trembling with every step. He booked a room with shaking hands, barely registering the clerk's concerned look. Then he collapsed on the bed. The sheets were cool against his feverish skin, but the relief lasted only a second before the fire surged back. He clutched at the fabric, knuckles white, breath ragged, as realization dawned like a freight train hitting him at full speed. He wasn't a beta. At 20 years old, long past the usual age of presentation, he was presenting as an omega. Alone, weak, in heat. No, 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 no. The wave of pheromones hit him again, and his entire body arched off the bed, a choked sound tearing from his throat. He'd never felt anything like this. The suppressants he'd never needed because he'd thought he was beta. The preparations he'd never made. The knowledge he'd never sought out because why would he? He was supposed to be beta. Everyone in his family was beta. Adrian remembered Lewis's easy promise from earlier. Text me if you need anything. I'll come running. His trembling hands fumbled with his phone. The screen blurred in and out of focus. He typed with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. Made it. Not going home. Got a room. Sick. Bring meds. Room 1301. He hit send and dropped the phone, too desperate to think, too far gone to check the contact name. All he could do was breathe. Or try to. Half an hour later, or maybe it was an eternity, time had stopped meaning anything. The doorbell rang. Relief flickered through the haze. Lewis had come. Lewis would help. Lewis would know what to do, would get him suppressants, would call a doctor, would something. Adrian dragged himself off the bed, every movement agony, and stumbled to the door. He pulled it open with what little strength he had left, one hand braced against the frame, and froze. Ryland Shun stood there, phone in hand, eyes dark and unreadable. On the screen, Adrian's desperate message glowed in the dim light, sent not to Lewis, but to him. For a single, suspended moment, neither of them moved. Adrian stared at Ryland. Ryland stared at Adrian. The phone screen dimmed and went dark. And then the air shifted. Ryland's pheromones hit Adrian like a physical force, leechy and something darker, something that smelled like thunderstorms and want. They swept over him, colliding with Adrian's uncontrolled omega heat like a storm meeting the sea. Adrian's world tilted. His knees buckled. Ryland caught him. Of course he did, because apparently the universe had a sick sense of humor. One arm wrapping around Adrian's waist, pulling him against a chest that was far too solid, far too warm. The first mistake was made the instant Ryland Shin stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Adrian knew, even through the haze of heat clouding his mind, that disaster had struck. His whole body was on fire, every nerve ending screaming for relief he didn't know how to ask for. The Omega presentation he had never prepared for hit him in full force, raw, unshielded, devastating. He stumbled backward, trying to escape. Ryland's grip on his wrist stopped him, hot and firm and far too steady. Let go, Adrian hissed, but his voice broke on the words, shame curling hot in his stomach. Ryland's eyes darkened. His nostrils flared, catching the delicate scent rising helplessly from Adrian's skin. Lily of the valley, sweet and desperate. He swallowed hard, his voice drained. You're an omega. Adrian forced out a bitter laugh, even as his body trembled against his will. No, you're smelling things. Your whole family are omegas. But even as he tried to joke, because that's what he did, he deflected with sarcasm and sharp edges. His body betrayed him. Trembling. Pheromones flooding the small hotel room in waves of desperate sweetness that made his head spin. Ryland inhaled sharply, his jaw tightening as if he were in physical pain. The lychee edge of his own scent spread like wildfire, intoxicating, invasive. His pupils dilated, a predatory red glint flickering in his gaze. Damn it, Adrian. His voice dropped lower, rougher. Stop looking at me like that. You'll push me over the edge. Adrian wanted to shove him away, wanted to scream, wanted to do anything other than what his body was screaming at him to do. But instead, his fingers curled into the front of Ryland's shirt, dragging him closer. Against every logical thought, against every instinct that told him to run, his body craved the heat, the pressure, the grounding strength of an alpha that his omega instincts had suddenly, violently decided it needed to survive. The air turned suffocating. Lychee and Lily of the Valley twined together, pheromones clawing at each other until Adrian could barely think, could barely remember his own name. His breath hitched as Ryland pressed him against the wall, their foreheads almost touching. You don't understand what this means, Ryland growled, his voice roughened by the edge of rut, restraint fraying with every passing second. Adrian tried to fight, he really did, but his body was trembling too hard, his skin too hot. Shame and desire burned in equal measure as he gasped out the words that would change everything. Then teach me. The last thread of control snapped. Ryland's lips crashed onto his, a brutal, consuming kiss that stole the breath from Adrian's lungs. He twisted in protest, but his resistance dissolved into ragged moans as the alpha's pheromones invaded every inch of him, dragging him deeper into the pool of heat and want. Hands roamed. Ryland's grip was iron on his waist, pinning him in place while his other hand cupped Adrian's neck. His thumb brushed dangerously close to the sensitive gland at the curve of Adrian's throat, and the touch sent sparks down his spine. Adrian's body arched against its own will, pressing closer. When Ryland finally bit down on his gland, Adrian cried out, half pain, half unbearable pleasure. A searing burn shot through him, hot enough to brand, tying them together in a way no contract or rivalry ever could. Waves of molten gold flooded his veins, Ryland's essence, rewriting his every cell, until hate blurred into hunger and the lines between enemy and anchor dissolved in the haze. Adrian clawed at Ryland's back, nails leaving angry red trails through the fabric of his expensive shirt. He was torn between wanting to escape and craving more. His pride shattered under the heat, his body answering shamelessly to every press of teeth, every surge of pheromone. When it was over, when the wave finally crested and receded, Adrian collapsed against Ryland's chest, trembling. Their scents still tangled thick in the air, lychee and Lily of the Valley inseparable. Ryland's voice was hoarse, dangerous in its certainty. You're mine now, Adrian. Permanently, Adrian shut his eyes. Fury mixed with something far more dangerous in his chest. An echo of need. Because no matter how much he hated Ryland Shen, no matter how many years of rivalry and resentment sat between them, his body had betrayed him completely. And that mark on his neck would never let him forget it. When Adrian woke the next morning, the hotel room was quiet. Too quiet. The sheets were heavy with the scent of lychee and something else, something that belonged to him now, the mingled smell of a bonded pair. His body ached in ways he didn't have words for. His mind replayed flashes of the night before, fleeting images he couldn't bear to look at too closely. The mark on his neck burned faintly, a brand that no amount of scrubbing could wash away. Ryland Shen was still asleep beside him. His features were calm in repose, almost boyish, almost soft. His dark lashes fanned against his cheeks. One arm was stretched out across the pillow, fingers inches from Adrian's hip. 4-1 heartbeat. Just one. Adrian stared at him, chest twisting with something between fear and disbelief. Then Ryland stirred. He murmured something sleepily, his voice rough with sleep. Adrian, stay. His arm reached out in the haze of post-rut haze, fingers brushing Adrian's hip with a tenderness that cracked something deep inside him. It was too much, too soft, too real. The panic slammed back in full force. Adrian couldn't stay. Not like this. Not after everything. Not with the mark on his neck burning like a promise he'd never asked for. He slipped out of bed with the silence of years of practice, the kind of silence you learned when you grew up in a house where being heard meant being heard. He gathered his clothes from the floor where they'd been thrown. He dressed with shaking hands. And by the time Ryland's breathing deepened back into sleep, Adrian was gone. He didn't have money for plane tickets. He didn't have the luxury of disappearing overseas or the resources to start over in a new country. What he did have was desperation. By the next evening, he boarded a long-distance bus heading away from the city's glass towers and neon haze. He carried one duffel bag with the essentials, some clothes, his degree certificate folded at the bottom like a lifeline, and a small envelope of cash that represented his entire savings. The bus rattled for hours, leaving behind the skyline that had defined his rivalry with Ryland since childhood. Glass towers faded into low-roofed houses. Neon signs gave way to rice fields stretching toward the horizon. The kind of silence that belonged to people with simpler lives settled over him. In a small county town, Adrian found work at a local middle school. The principal, an older beta woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, had been impressed by his grades. A Huaxia University graduate didn't show up in places like this every day. She offered him a position as a substitute teacher. The pay was barely enough. The room he rented was smaller than his childhood bedroom, but it was enough to keep him fed. Adrian threw himself into routines, grading papers, teaching grammar, sweeping the dusty classroom floor when the janitor was sick. He told himself this was freedom, that obscurity was safety. But at night, when the bond tugged at his chest like an invisible chain, he lay awake in the narrow bed, sweat dampening the sheets. His body reeled through heats he barely understood, heats that clawed at him like thorns. The suppressants he managed to buy from the town's small pharmacy dulled the edge, but they couldn't erase the ghost of Ryland's teeth. He lay curled fetal in the dark, whispering curses into his pillow. The phantom sin of lychee teased at the edges of his fevered dreams. Suppressants were expensive, and even when he managed to scrounge together enough for a few pills, they never worked as well as they should. His body had been claimed, marked, bonded, and distance alone couldn't undo what Ryland's bite had done. He endured, bit his knuckles to stay silent, prayed his landlord didn't notice the sounds that escaped some nights. 2 months later, the dizziness started. Adrian had assumed it was exhaustion. He was working too hard, sleeping too little, eating too irregularly. The suppressants probably weren't helping either. He ignored it as long as he could, but when the dizziness became a constant companion, he finally dragged himself to the village clinic. The doctor was an older man with weathered hands and a gentle manner. He ran tests. He frowned at the results. Adrian's heart pounded. He knows, Adrian thought. He knows I'm an Omega hiding out here. He knows I'm bonded. He knows. The doctor gave a quiet nod and handed him a slip of paper. Congratulations, the doctor said gently. You're about 8 weeks along. Adrian stared at the paper. The letters blurred in front of his eyes. Pregnant. The wording makes sense. It couldn't make sense. He was an Omega, yes, that part he'd accepted, but pregnant? With Ryland Shin's child? The bond had been a single night, a single encounter, a single. The math caught up with him. 8 weeks. The hotel room. The heat. The bite. Adrian clutched the paper, his pulse racing, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He should have been terrified. He was terrified. But beneath the panic came something else. Something fragile and dangerous and entirely unexpected. Tenderness. A child. His and Ryland Shen's. For the first time since fleeing, Adrian's eyes blurred with something other than exhaustion. He pressed a hand to his still flat stomach, and something within him, some deep primal part he hadn't known existed, whispered yes. He had no savings, no plan, no idea how to raise a baby in a town where even chalk was rationed. But he also knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would keep this child. The months passed. Adrian's body changed. His world shrank further. He worked as long as he could, hiding his growing belly beneath loose shirts and cardigans, and then took leave when the pregnancy grew too heavy to conceal. His colleagues whispered. The townsfolk speculated. Adrian ignored them all. In the dim light of his rented room, he folded tiny second-hand clothes, washed and rewashed until they were soft, and patched them with uneven stitches but full of care. Loneliness weighed on him like a physical thing, pressing down on his chest until he couldn't breathe. But when he pressed his hand to his belly and felt the faint flutter of a kick, something within him steadied. This child was his anchor, his proof that life could grow even in exile. The birth was hard, harder than anything Adrian had ever endured. The town didn't have a proper hospital, only a small clinic with limited resources, and there was no one to hold his hand or tell him he was doing well. He gritted his teeth. He bore down. He screamed into a pillow so the neighbors wouldn't hear. And then a cry, sharp, demanding. Alive? Adrian reached down with trembling arms and pulled his son against his chest. The baby was small, too small, maybe, with a shock of dark hair and a face that was already scrunched up in outrage at being evicted from his warm home. A boy, the midwife said softly, smiling. A healthy boy. Adrian looked down at his son and fell completely, irrevocably in love. He named him Mingyu, Bright Universe, because this child had brought light into the darkness Adrian had been living in. Because looking at him, Adrian could almost believe that the universe wasn't entirely cruel. The years slipped away like sand through fingers. Adrian lived quietly in the small riverside town, far from the glass towers and political games of the city. To the townsfolk, he was simply Teacher Wei, dependable, quiet, a young man who taught literature at the middle school and raised his son alone. His days were ordinary, but they were filled with the kind of fragile happiness Adrian had once thought impossible. Mornings began with Mingyu tugging at his sleeve, demanding, "Daddy, hurry, we'll be late." Evenings ended with a boy curled against him, asleep before the lanterns outside their window dimmed. Their rented home was modest, textbooks stacked on the desk, patched curtains swaying in the breeze, Mingyu's childish drawings taped crookedly on the walls. At festivals, they lit paper lanterns together. Adrian always wished for the same thing. Peace. Just one more year of peace. And yet, the bond was never silent. On restless nights, Adrian woke drenched in sweat, the phantom echo of a hand at his scent gland, a voice whispering his name. He told himself the bond was stretched thin by distance. He told himself that Ryland Shin must have long forgotten him, moved on to other omegas, other conquests, other heirs to produce. But the thread remained, faint, unbroken, tugging whenever Adrian dared to believe he was safe. Mingyu grew. He had Adrian's sharp cheekbones and quick temper, but everything else, the way he laughed, the way he tilted his head when he was curious, the way his eyes narrowed when he was concentrating, was pure Ryland. Every time Adrian looked at his son, he saw the ghost of the alpha who had marked him. Every time Mingyu smiled with that same sharp tilt of his lips, the same infuriating smirk from the night Ryland had pinned him against the wall, Adrian felt a knife twist in his chest. He never told Mingyu who his father was. How could he? To say the name Ryland Shin would summon a world Adrian had fought to escape. In the city, Ryland Shin had not forgotten. He had not moved on. He had not produced heirs with other Omegas or lost himself in the endless distractions his wealth could buy. Instead, he had searched. Ryland remembered waking up that morning 3 years ago. The sheets cool where Adrian should have been, the faint trace of lily of the valley still lingering in the air. He remembered the ache in his chest where the bond had been forged, an emptiness that hadn't been there before. He had expected fury, guilt, denial, anything. But instead, there was only silence. Adrian had vanished as if he'd never existed. For 3 years, Ryland searched. He scoured alumni lists. He pulled favors through the Shin family's vast network, favors that cost him in ways his father would never let him forget. He followed paper trails across universities and cities, chasing leads that went nowhere. At first, he believed Adrian had gone abroad. Rumors spread through the alumni network. Someone had seen him in America, in Canada, and Europe. Ryland flew across oceans, chasing ghosts. Each time, he returned empty-handed. What finally gave him the thread was a slip. An old classmate of Adrian's posted a photo from a rural school charity event on social media. The photo was meant to showcase the new library the charity had funded, but standing in the background, half obscured, facing away from the camera, was a figure with a familiar slope of shoulders. Ryland's heart had stopped. He'd zoomed in, called his investigators. They dug deeper. The details fell into place. A scholarship record, a teaching contract, a small county town that no of Ryland's status should have ever heard of. He had found him. Within 48 hours, Ryland was on a train heading away from the city's glass towers, toward the kind of rural landscape he'd only seen in photographs. His suit was rumpled from the journey. His hair was disheveled. He didn't care. The town was smaller than he'd imagined. A single main street, a few shops, a school with a peeling paint sign. The houses were modest, their gardens overgrown with vegetables instead of ornamental flowers. Ryland found the address his investigators had provided and stood outside for a long moment, just breathing. He could feel the bond. After 3 years of faint, distant tugging, it suddenly blazed to life, close, so close, humming in his chest like a second heartbeat. Adrian was behind that door. Adrian and the files hadn't mentioned a child. Ryland pushed the thought aside and knocked. The doorway opened, and the years Adrian had carefully built crumbled in an instant. Ryland Shin stood there. His suit was wrinkled from travel. His eyes were burning with exhaustion and something far sharper, fury, relief, desperation, all tangled together. His scent struck Adrian like a storm. Lychee sweetness laced with bitterness, with longing, with rage. Adrian. Ryland's voice was hoarse, barely controlled. Do you mind explaining why I woke up one morning and my other half was just gone? Adrian's breath caught. His knees threatened to buckle. And then, Daddy. Mingyu's soft voice piped up from behind Adrian's legs. The boy peeked around his father, dark eyes wide with curiosity, dark hair falling across his forehead. He stared up at the tall stranger with the intense gaze and the rumpled suit. Who's this uncle? Mingyu asked. He tilted his head, that familiar, infuriating tilt. He smells like candy. Can he stay for dinner? The silence cracked like thunder. Ryland's gaze darted to the boy, then back to Adrian. For the first time in years, Ryland Shin's carefully controlled composure shattered. Disbelief and fury warred on his face, giving way to something far more dangerous. Understanding. The boy had Adrian's cheekbones, but everything else, the tilt of his head, the shape of his eyes, the way he looked at Ryland with that sharp, assessing curiosity, was unmistakable. Ryland's voice came out strangled. Adrian, is that my son? The room felt suffocating after Mingyu's bedroom door clicked shut. Adrian had sent him to play with a neighbor's kid, Some flimsy excuse about needing to talk to the uncle alone, and Mingyu, mercifully oblivious, had gone without protest. Now Adrian stood pressed against the kitchen counter, his pulse racing, every nerve on edge. He had dreamed of this moment in his nightmares. Ryland finding him, the truth laid bare. Now that it was real, it was worse than anything he had imagined. Ryland stood in the center of the small living room, taking up far too much space. His suit jacket was off now, draped over the back of the patched armchair. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms that Adrian remembered all too clearly. The 3 years showed on him, not in aging, but in something harder, sharper. The exhaustion around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. The tension in his jaw spoke of unspoken words. 3 years, Ryland said finally, his voice low and sharp. Do you have any idea what you put me through? Adrian's lips trembled. Ryland, you disappeared. Ryland's words came like blades. Without a word. After bonding me. After tying me to you for life. You just vanished. I had to. Do you know what that bond felt like? Ryland's voice cracked, just slightly. Like being dragged into hell every single night. Like drowning. Like burning alive. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't breathe without feeling you slipping further away. Adrian opened his mouth, closed it. And then today, Ryland's voice dropped, trembling with restrained fury. I find you living quietly with my son, working as a teacher, hiding in a town that doesn't even have a proper grocery store. Mingyu is mine, Adrian said, his voice stronger than he felt. I raised him. You weren't there. Ryland surged forward. He slammed a hand against the counter beside Adrian's hip, not touching, but close enough that Adrian could feel the heat radiating off his body. Ryland's pheromones flared, heavy with dominance, the scent of lychee flooding the small kitchen. Ryland's breath ghosted across Adrian's gland. The mark, 3 years faded but never gone, throbbed to life, sending a shiver through Adrian's body. His traitorous omega instincts purred at the proximity, at the dominance, at the presence of his alpha. Adrian's knees nearly buckled under the weight of it. Don't you dare, Ryland hissed, face inches from Adrian's. Say he's only yours. He's my blood, Adrian. Ours. Adrian's throat ached. He forced the words out, even as his body screamed at him to submit. I ran because I was scared. Scared of you. Scared of the bond. Scared of losing myself. Ryland's expression twisted, half fury, half something else. His grip on the counter tightened until his knuckles went white. You think I would have abandoned you? His voice cracked again, raw and ragged. You think I would have left you to face this alone? I didn't know what to think. Adrian's voice broke free, louder than he intended. You hated me our whole lives. Every competition, every debate, every time you looked at me like I was something beneath you. Hated you. Ryland laughed, short, sharp, bitter. Is that what you thought? That all those years of chasing, competing, taunting, that was hate? Adrian stared at him. Ryland's eyes darkened. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You were the only one I ever saw, Adrian. The only one. Everyone else blurred together. Background noise, scenery, unimportant. But you. You burned. You burned, and I couldn't look away. That's not. Do you remember that debate in the gymnasium? Senior year. Ryland's voice was barely a whisper now, raw and honest in a way Adrian had never heard from him. I tore into your points not to win, not just to win, but because arguing with you made me feel alive. Your fire, your passion, the way your eyes lit up when you made a point you believed in. Adrian's chest constricted. You pulled at me, Ryland continued. Even then, and that night at the hotel, his voice faltered, breath heavy. That night you gave yourself to me, and then you left. You left me with nothing but a bond and a ghost. The bond between them thrummed, raw, unhealed, pulling tight until Adrian could hardly breathe. From behind the closed bedroom door, Mingyu's soft voice drifted through. "Daddy, are you still fighting with the uncle?" Adrian's chest constricted even tighter. Ryland's grip on the counter loosened, but his eyes stayed locked on Adrian, hungry, furious, desperate. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The storm of confrontation left the room raw and heavy. But after Mingyu's footsteps faded down the hall, sent to the neighbor's house with a handful of cookies and a promise to behave, silence returned. A silence too sharp, too full of the words left unspoken. Adrian stood rigid by the kitchen counter, one hand gripping the edge as if he might bolt again. His heart was still racing, his body still humming with the proximity of Ryland's pheromones. Ryland had collapsed onto the small sofa, the one with the patched cushions that Adrian had covered with a thrift store blanket. His head was in his hands. The fury still edged his jaw, but his eyes, when he finally looked up, were clouded with something far more fragile. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ryland's voice, hoarse, cracked at the edges, cut through the quiet. "You ran because you thought I didn't want you." Adrian's lips trembled. He wanted to deny it, wanted to cling to his pride, his anger, his carefully constructed walls. But the truth slipped out in a whisper. "You always looked at me like I was your enemy. I thought that night, I thought it was just heat and rut. That it meant nothing." His voice broke. "And after, I couldn't risk you taking him away from me. I couldn't risk losing Mingyu." Ryland flinched like Adrian had struck him. He pressed a hand to his temple, almost laughing at the absurdity of it all. 3 years. Do you have any idea what those 3 years were for me? Every city, every lead, I chased them all. I wasn't searching for an Omega. I wasn't searching for a child." He looked up, and his gaze pinned Adrian in place. "I was searching for you." Adrian's breath caught. The raw honesty in Ryland's voice left no room for doubt. He wasn't lying. He wasn't manipulating. The bond hummed between them, and through it, Adrian could feel the truth of Ryland's words. Desperation, longing, loss. Ryland rose slowly from the sofa and crossed the space between them. He stopped only a step away, as if afraid Adrian might retreat again. "I've been a fool," Ryland said quietly. "I thought if I demanded, if I forced, you'd stay. But you're not a chain I can hold. You've always been fire, always slipping past my grasp." His voice dropped lower. "And still, you were the only one who ever mattered." The weight of those words struck deeper than anger ever had. Adrian's chest tightened. The walls he'd built, brick by brick, year by year, crumbled under the sincerity shining in Ryland's gaze. "I can't undo the past," Ryland continued, softer now. "But give me a chance. Not as an alpha claiming an omega. Not because of a bond. But as me, just a man who's loved you far longer than I ever admitted." Adrian's knees weakened. He remembered the years of rivalry, the endless bickering, the heat of that night and the lonely mornings after. The birth, alone in a clinic that smelled of antiseptic and fear. The sleepless nights with a newborn who wouldn't stop crying. The exhaustion of raising a child on nothing but hope and stubbornness. But most of all, he remembered the exhaustion in Ryland's eyes when he'd appeared at the door. An alpha worn raw by 3 years of searching. Slowly, so slowly, Adrian let go of the counter. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I don't know if I can forgive everything yet. I don't know if I can trust." He swallowed hard. "But I'm tired too, Ryland. I'm so tired of running." Ryland exhaled, a breath Ryland seemed to have been holding for 3 years. Relief flooded his face, softening the hard edges, making him look younger. Tentatively, he reached out. His fingers brushed Adrian's wrist. This time, Adrian didn't pull away. The accidental touch sparked like dry tinder, a minor echo of heat rippling through them both. Ryland's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening, and Adrian felt his own gland throb with a sweet ache that pulled a gasp from his lips. It was fleeting. a promise of storms yet to come, but enough to ground them in the now. Ryland leaned in slowly, giving Adrian every chance to pull back. Adrian didn't. The kiss was gentle, not the fevered desperation of their bonding night, not the reckless hunger of their youth. It was steady, lingering, the kind of kiss that carried both regret and promise in equal measure. When they parted, foreheads pressed together, Ryland whispered, "Let's start over. You, me, and Mingyu. A family, if you'll let me." Adrian closed his eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to imagine what that might feel like. And for the first time, he didn't feel the urge to run. Epilogue, the lanterns. Months later, under the glow of festival lanterns, the three of them knelt together by the riverbank. Mingyu's small hands fumbled with a paper lantern, his tongue poking out in concentration. Ryland guided him gently, showing him how to hold the candle steady, how to keep the paper from catching fire. "Like this, little one," Ryland said, his voice warm in a way Adrian had never imagined possible. "Slowly. You've got it." Mingyu beamed. The lantern caught the light, glowing soft gold in the darkness. Together, father and son lowered it onto the water, where it joined hundreds of others, floating wishes, prayers, hopes for the future. Adrian watched from beside them, the bond humming contentedly in his chest. Not a chain. Not anymore. Quiet warmth. The thread that connected them all, weaving Adrian, Ryland, and Mingyu into something whole. Ryland's hand found his in the darkness. Their fingers laced together, easy now, natural in a way that still surprised Adrian sometimes. "Penny for your thoughts," Ryland murmured. Adrian watched Mingyu's lantern drift downstream, his son's laughter bright in the night air. "Maybe," Adrian said slowly, "some good things come from running away." Ryland snorted. "Don't push it." Adrian laughed. Really laughed, the kind that came from somewhere deep, and leaned into Ryland's side. They watched the lanterns float away, carrying their wishes into the dark. And Adrian, for the first time in his life, didn't wish for escape. He wished for more. More nights like this. More laughter. More of the quiet, steady warmth of a family he never dared to dream he could have. Mingyu ran back to them, grabbing both their hands, pulling them toward the food stalls with the boundless energy of a child who had never known hunger or fear. And Adrian let himself be pulled. Into the light. Into the future. Into a life he'd never expected but couldn't imagine living without. 3 months after the reunion. The first time Adrian went into heat after Ryland came back, it happened in the middle of grading papers. One moment he was sitting at the kitchen table, red pen in hand, circling grammatical errors on a student's essay about the changing seasons. The next moment, the world tilted. Heat flooded through him like someone had opened a furnace door directly beneath his skin. His pen clattered onto the floor. Not now, he thought desperately, gripping the edge of the table. Not now, not now, not. The suppressants. He'd been taking them regularly, religiously, even ever since Ryland had moved in. But the doctor in town had warned him that bonded heats were different, stronger, unpredictable. She hadn't been kidding. Adrian's breath came in short, ragged gasps. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The familiar ache twisted low in his gut, but this time it was sharper, more insistent, and beneath it, something new. Not the desperate clawing need of his early heats alone in this same apartment, when he'd bitten his knuckles bloody to stay silent. This was different. This was heat mixed with the knowledge that his alpha was right there, just in the other room, and every instinct he possessed was screaming at him to go find him. The bond flared. And somewhere in the apartment, Ryland's answering pheromones surged. Adrian heard a chair scrape back. Footsteps, fast, urgent, crossed the living room. Then Ryland was in the kitchen doorway, his dark hair tousled from wherever he'd been sitting, his eyes already gone half dark with the first edge of rut. "Adrian." His voice was rough, strained. "You're—" Adrian gasped out. I know. I didn't. It came on so fast. Ryland crossed the room in 3 strides. His hands cupped Adrian's face. Gentle, so gentle, even though his pupils were blown wide and his scent was flooding the kitchen like a storm. What do you need? Ryland asked. His thumb brushed across Adrian's cheekbone, wiping away sweat or tears. Adrian wasn't sure which. Tell me. I'll do anything. Adrian's breath hitched. In the 3 months since Ryland had come back, they'd been careful, deliberate. They talked more than they'd ever talked in their entire lives. They'd gone on actual dates, dinner at the town's only restaurant, walks along the river at sunset, lazy Sunday mornings with Mingyu piled between them in bed. But they hadn't. They'd kissed, but slept in the same bed with Ryland's arms wrapped around Adrian's waist. But they hadn't gone there. Not since that first night. Not since the marking. Because Adrian had been scared of what it would mean, scared of falling too deep, scared of losing himself again. And Ryland, infuriatingly, impossibly, had been patient. But now, Adrian's voice broke. His body arched toward Ryland without his permission, he drawing him like a magnet. I need you. Something in Ryland's expression cracked open. Adrian, his voice was barely a whisper. Are you sure? We can wait. I can leave, give you space, call the doctor for stronger suppressants. Don't you dare. Adrian grabbed fistfuls of Ryland's shirt, pulling him closer. Don't you dare leave me alone in this again. I've done that. I've done the lonely heats. I've done the suppressants and the biting my knuckles and the crying into my pillow so the neighbors wouldn't hear. His eyes burned. I don't want that anymore. I want you. Ryland made a sound, something between a groan and a broken laugh, and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was heat and hunger and 3 years of separation colliding at once. Ryland's hands slid down Adrian's back, gripping his hips, pulling him flush against his body. Adrian gasped into Ryland's mouth, his fingers tangling in dark hair, pulling hard enough to sting. Bedroom. Ryland growled against his lips. Now. They stumbled through the apartment, knocking into furniture, nearly tripping over Mingyu's scattered toys. Adrian laughed breathlessly against Ryland's neck, and then Ryland's teeth scraped over his bonding mark, and laughter turned into a moan. Don't tease, Adrian managed. I can. I know. Ryland's voice was wrecked. I've got you. They made it to the bedroom. The door closed behind them, and the world narrowed to skin and heat, and the overwhelming scent of lychee and lily of the valley twining together until Adrian couldn't tell where he ended and Ryland began. Later, much later, Adrian lay sprawled across Ryland's chest, still trembling, still buzzing. The sheets were ruined. The whole room smelled like them. Somewhere in the distance, a dog was barking, and the afternoon light had faded into something softer, gold and amber through the thin curtains. Ryland's fingers traced lazy patterns on Adrian's bare back. Okay, Ryland murmured. Adrian snorted, his voice hoarse. Define okay? Not dying. I'm not dying. Adrian paused. Maybe a little dying, but in a good way. Ryland's laugh rumbled through his chest, vibrating against Adrian's cheek. His arms tightened around Adrian, pulling him closer, and Adrian went willingly, curling into the warmth, into the steady beat of Ryland's heart. I should check on Mingyu, Adrian said eventually. He's at the neighbor's, but he's fine. Ryland pressed a kiss to the top of Adrian's head. I texted Mrs. Chin. She said he's having the time of his life and not to come get him until morning. Adrian lifted his head, staring at Ryland. You texted her? When? While you were in the bathroom. The first time. Ryland's lips twitched. You were gone for a while. I got bored. You got bored. I got worried. Same thing. Adrian shook his head, but he was smiling, a real smile, the kind that still surprised him sometimes. He let his head fall back onto Ryland's chest, listening to the steady thump of his heartbeat. I used to imagine this, Adrian said quietly. During my heats, before you came back. Ryland's hand stilled on his back. I'd lie in this exact bed, Adrian continued, curled up with my knees to my chest, and I'd imagine what it would be like if you were here. If you'd found me. If you'd, his voice caught. If you'd wanted me. Ryland made a raw sound, low in his throat. His arms tightened almost painfully. Adrian, I know now. Adrian tilted his head back, meeting Ryland's eyes. But back then, I didn't. Back then, all I had was the bond and my imagination and a baby who looked at me with your eyes every single day. Ryland's jaw clenched. Something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or grief, or a complicated mix of both. I'm sorry, Ryland whispered. I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner. I'm sorry you had to do it alone. I'm sorry for every night you spent crying into this pillow while I was across the world, chasing false leads, being useless. Adrian kissed him. Just a soft press of lips, gentle, meant to hush. Stop, Adrian said when he pulled back. We've done the apologies. We've done the guilt. We've done the what-ifs. He traced his thumb across Ryland's cheekbone, catching a tear Adrian hadn't realized was there. Right now, I just want to be here. With you. In this bed. In this room. Ryland blinked at him, looking almost vulnerable. Not the perfect alpha heir, not the ruthless competitor, just a man who had spent 3 years searching for something he'd been terrified he'd never find. Can we just... Adrian hesitated, then let himself be soft. Can we just hold each other for a while? Ryland's expression broke into something so tender it made Adrian's chest ache. Yeah, Ryland whispered. Yeah, we can do that. He pulled the blanket up around them, the old one with the patches that Adrian had sewn himself, back when he'd been pregnant and nesting and too stubborn to buy new ones. It smelled like both of them now. Lychee and lily of the valley mingled together. Adrian tucked his face against Ryland's neck, breathing him in. The heat wasn't over. He could feel it simmering beneath his skin, waiting to rise again. But for now, in this moment, there was just this. Warmth, safety, the quiet miracle of being held. I love you, Ryland murmured against his hair. Adrian closed his eyes. 3 months ago, those words would have terrified him. 3 years ago, he wouldn't have believed them. But now he just let them settle into his chest, warm and solid and real. I love you too, Adrian whispered back. Even when you're infuriating. Especially when I'm infuriating. Especially then. Ryland laughed, soft and low, and pressed a kiss to Adrian's forehead. Outside, the sun finished setting, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Inside, tangled together in a bed that smelled like home, 2 people who had spent years fighting finally stopped. Not because the fight was over, but because they'd found something worth more than winning. Bonus scene. The next morning, Mingyu burst through the front door with all the subtlety of a small hurricane. Daddy, Mrs. Chen let me feed the chickens and I saw a frog and I drew a picture and he skidded to a halt in the bedroom doorway, staring at the 2 figures in the bed. Why is Uncle Ryland still here? It's morning. Ryland groaned, pulling a pillow over his face. Adrian laughed, bright and surprised and so full of warmth it almost hurt. Uncle Ryland lives here now, remember? Adrian said, reaching out to ruffle Mingyu's hair. He's not going anywhere. Mingyu considered this. Okay, he said finally, already turning to run back to the living room. But he has to make breakfast. Mrs. Chen said alphas who don't make breakfast are bad alphas. Ryland lowered the pillow, looking affronted. I make excellent breakfast. You burn toast, Adrian said sweetly. I do not. You burned toast yesterday. That was one time. Mingyu's voice drifted in from the kitchen. Uncle Ryland. The eggs are smoking. Ryland was out of bed before Adrian could blink, grabbing his shirt from the floor and tugging it on as he ran. Adrian watched him go, still smiling, still warm. And when Ryland paused in the doorway, turning back just long enough to meet Adrian's eyes, to smile at him like Adrian was something precious, Adrian felt the bond pulse. Not a chain. Promise. He got out of bed, stretched, and followed his family into the kitchen. The kitchen smelled like smoke and embarrassment. Adrian leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching Ryland Shin heir to the Shen Group empire, the most sought-after alpha of his generation, a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals and destroyed rivals in boardrooms, frantically wave a kitchen towel at a smoking frying pan. "You're making it worse," Adrian said mildly. "I am fixing it," Ryland gritted out. Mingyu sat at the kitchen table, chin in his hands, watching the spectacle with the profound judgment only a 3-year-old could muster. "Uncle Ryland," he said solemnly, "the eggs are black. They're caramelized. They're burned." Adrian snorted. Ryland shot him a look of pure betrayal. "You could help," Ryland said. "You said you make excellent breakfast." "I do. Under normal circumstances. With a normal kitchen. And normal eggs that don't conspire against me." Mingyu slid off his chair, tugged on Adrian's sleeve, and whispered loudly, "Daddy, I think Uncle Ryland is a bad cook." "I heard that," Ryland said. "You were supposed to," Mingyu said cheerfully. Adrian laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep and unexpected. He crossed the kitchen, gently nudged Ryland aside, and took over the pan. Within minutes, new eggs were sizzling, toast was in the toaster, and the smoke had cleared. Ryland stood behind him, arms wrapping around Adrian's waist, chin resting on his shoulder. "Show off," Ryland murmured. "Learn from the best," Adrian said. "Had to survive 3 years without a personal chef." The words came out lighter than they would have a few months ago. The edge was gone. The bitterness had softened into something closer to a shared joke, a scar that still ached sometimes, but no longer bled. Ryland pressed a kiss to the curve of Adrian's neck, right over the bonding mark. "I'm never letting you cook alone again. That's a threat, not a promise. It's both." Mingyu, oblivious to the moment, banged his spoon on the table. "Eggs, Daddy. Eggs now." Adrian plated the eggs. Ryland carried the plates to the table, and for a few minutes the only sounds were forks on plates and Mingyu's happy humming. Later, after breakfast was eaten and the dishes were washed and Mingyu was drawing at the table with his tongue poking out in concentration, Adrian found himself standing at the window, watching the town wake up. Ryland came up behind him. "What are you thinking about?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. "I'm thinking about how I never imagined this." "What, me burning eggs?" Adrian smiled. "No, this." He gestured at the room behind him, the patched curtains, the crooked drawings on the walls, the small chaos of a life built from nothing. "A family. A home. Someone who—" He hesitated. "Someone who stays." Ryland's hand found his. Squeezed. "I'm not going anywhere," Ryland said quietly. "Not ever again." Adrian turned, looked up at him, at this man who had once been his rival, his enemy, the person he hated most in the world. Now he was the person Adrian loved most in the world. Funny how that worked. "Good," Adrian said, "because I'd find you. This time I'd find you." Ryland's smile was slow and warm and worth every hard year that had come before it. "Deal."